In the heart of Denver's peaceful suburbs, nestled among rows of trimmed hedges and wide driveways, stood the home of Richard and Melissa Harper. Their two-story house, painted a soft ivory with blue shutters, was the kind of place people slowed down to admire. It wasn't just the architecture that drew attention. It was the people who lived there. Richard, a 36-year-old software engineer, and Melissa, a 34-year-old interior designer, were everything a picture-perfect couple was supposed to be. To anyone who met them, they were the embodiment of success and stability. Their story began the way many great love stories do. They had met at a conference in Chicago, connected over coffee, and quickly became inseparable. Richard was calm, logical, and soft-spoken. Melissa was energetic, creative, and warm-hearted. They complemented each other in all the right ways. Their wedding, held in a vineyard outside Boulder, had been featured in a local bridal magazine. Everyone who knew them believed their love story would last forever. In the early years of their marriage, the Harpers were inseparable. Richard would bring home flowers randomly, and Melissa would cook his favorite meals on stressful days. Their weekends were spent hiking the Rockies, binge-watching documentaries, or redecorating rooms just for fun. Melissa loved color and change, while Richard loved routine, but somehow, they always found a middle ground. They celebrated each anniversary with the same kind of awe, still looking at each other like it was their first date. By their 9th year of marriage, their life seemed even more polished. They had no children, but shared a golden retriever named Bailey. Richard had recently been promoted to lead developer at his firm, and Melissa's interior design business had just landed a contract with a luxury apartment complex. Friends often commented on how lucky they were, not just for what they had, but for how effortlessly they seemed to have it. Melissa had a talent for making their house feel like home, and Richard was the quiet force that kept everything running smoothly. But what no one knew, not even Melissa herself at first, was that Richard had started to change. It began subtly. He stopped bringing home flowers. Their weekly date nights turned into silent dinners in front of the television. Melissa thought it was stress from work. After all, Richard had never liked talking about his problems. He was the type to hold it in, to deal with things privately. So she gave him space. Maybe too much space. Then came the locked doors. Richard had always kept his home office private, but now he locked the basement too, a space that had always been shared for storage and tools. He started staying up late, typing away on his laptop with headphones on, refusing to discuss what he was working on. He told Melissa it was sensitive work, something for a cybersecurity project. She believed him, though unease began to nest in her chest. By December, Melissa had started confiding in her sister, Erica. She admitted that things felt different, colder. Richard didn't yell or lash out. He wasn't cruel. He just wasn't there anymore. When he did talk, his words were clipped and brief. When he looked at her, it was as if he was seeing someone else. The man who once kissed her forehead every morning now left for work without a word, and yet nothing was obviously wrong. There were no fights, no broken plates, no doors slammed in anger. It was the absence of those things that made it harder. Melissa couldn't even put her finger on. What had gone wrong? It felt like drifting through fog, knowing something dangerous might be ahead, but unable to see it. In February, Richard's behavior became stranger. He added new security cameras around the house, including one inside the garage and another pointing directly at the front door. He told Melissa it was for safety. There had been a break-in 2 streets over. but he seemed less concerned about intruders and more interested in watching the footage himself. Every evening, he sat in his office reviewing hours of video. Melissa asked if something had happened, but he brushed it off, saying, "Just making. Sure, we're protected." One night, Melissa noticed something odd. Richard had left his laptop open, and for a brief moment, she glanced at the screen. There was a spreadsheet open, names, dates, amounts. She couldn't make sense of it, and when she asked, he quickly closed the computer and changed the subject. She wanted to press him, to demand answers, but she didn't. She wasn't sure. Why? Maybe she was afraid of what she might learn. Despite everything, Melissa tried to hold on to their marriage. She decorated the house for spring, bought new curtains, and even planned a weekend getaway. Richard agreed to go, but when the weekend arrived, he claimed he had work. Melissa went alone, spent 2 days at a mountain cabin, and cried more than she'd expected. The distance between them grew heavier. It wasn't a rift you could see from outside. They still posed for pictures, still smiled at neighborhood events, still posted the occasional date night photo. But in private, their conversations were reduced to logistical exchanges. What time are you coming home? Did you feed the dog? The plumber's arriving at 2. Emotion was gone. Warmth had evaporated. What hurt Melissa the most was the silence. It was like living with a ghost, one who used to love her but now saw her as furniture. She began journaling every day, writing down small things. How many hours Richard stayed in the basement, what time he locked his laptop, when he changed passwords on the Wi-Fi. She didn't know what she was building, evidence maybe, or just trying to hold on to reality. But something inside her told her to keep track. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Richard's mind was no longer anchored in their life. He had secrets buried deep, financial decisions gone wrong, online gambling under different names, debts rising faster than he could cover them. The pressure was immense. And the more he sank, the more he believed that Melissa knew something, that she was watching, that she might leave. Melissa had no idea that every smile she forced, every silent dinner she endured, every night she fell, asleep alone, was bringing her closer to a terrifying end, and neither did anyone else. Melissa's friend Anna had known her for over a decade. They had met in college, shared apartments, traveled together, and stood beside each other at their weddings. So when Anna started sensing that something wasn't quite right, she couldn't ignore it. Melissa had stopped answering phone calls regularly, and her replies to texts had grown shorter and less frequent. She no longer shared photos of her design work or updates about her clients, which she had once loved doing. What concerned Anna most was Melissa's tone, guarded, uncertain, and strangely distant. After several weeks of unanswered invitations, Anna decided to stop by unannounced. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon. The moment Melissa opened the door, Anna's heart sank. Melissa looked thinner, her skin paler than usual, and her eyes were shadowed with fatigue. Her smile was forced, her posture stiff. Anna stepped inside and immediately noticed the difference in the house. The usually vibrant living room, once full of seasonal decorations and scented candles, felt cold and uninviting. There were no fresh flowers on the dining table, no music playing in the background, just silence. They sat on the couch and made small talk. Melissa spoke about work, about how business had been slow and clients were indecisive lately. But Anna noticed she kept glancing toward the hallway, as if she was expecting someone to walk in at any moment. There was nervousness in her movements, like she was being watched. Then, when Melissa reached for a cushion, her sleeve slipped back slightly, revealing faint bruises near her wrist. Anna didn't react immediately, but later asked casually if Melissa had hurt herself. Melissa laughed softly and said she had tripped on the stairs carrying laundry, but her voice trembled slightly, and Anna knew she was lying. That evening, Anna sent a long message, telling Melissa she was worried and offering her a place to stay if she ever needed it. Melissa didn't respond. Instead, the next morning she deleted her last few social media posts. To others, it meant nothing. But to Anna, it felt like Melissa was slowly withdrawing from the world. Meanwhile, Richard had become consumed by paranoia. He barely spoke to Melissa anymore, and when he did, it was often clipped and cold. He had started accusing her of things she didn't understand, checking his phone, following him, even listening in on his private calls. Melissa had no idea what he was talking about. She hadn't touched his phone or questioned his comings and goings. But he became convinced that she was spying on him, that she was planning something behind his back. He added more locks to the doors, changed the security system settings so that only he had access to the live feed. He even installed a new keypad to the basement door and began spending most nights down there. When Melissa asked what he was working on, he told her she wouldn't understand. He became secretive about their finances, refusing to let her log into their shared bank account and moving documents into locked drawers. Melissa felt like a stranger in her own home. Outwardly, Richard remained calm and rational. He still went to work, still mowed the lawn on weekends, and still waved to neighbors when they passed. But inside, his mind was spinning. His investments had gone terribly wrong. Months earlier, he had pulled money from their joint savings and gambled it on a risky cryptocurrency venture. He had believed it was a sure thing. Instead, the market crashed, and their money disappeared overnight. Rather than come clean, Richard tried to fix it by digging deeper, using credit lines and personal loans in Melissa's name without her knowledge. Every day, he feared she'd find out. Every time she checked the mailbox, he assumed she was reading a letter from the bank. If she spent time on her laptop, he was sure she was researching something about him. Even innocent questions, did you get the mail? Or are we still paying for the storage unit? Triggered suspicion. In his mind, Melissa wasn't just his wife anymore. She was someone he needed to control. Melissa, unaware of the financial chaos Richard had created, simply felt like she was losing her partner. She kept writing in her journal, documenting the things he said, the changes in his behavior, and her own growing fear. She stopped inviting friends over, stopped asking Richard to do things together, and began to retreat emotionally. One evening, she stood in front of the mirror and stared at herself, wondering how she had ended up here. How had the man who once read her poetry and held her hand at every airport become someone she barely recognized? She wasn't sure if she still loved him, or if she was just holding on to the memory of who he used to be. One day, while cleaning the kitchen drawers, Melissa came across a small slip of paper tucked beneath the cutlery tray. It was a receipt from a pawn shop across town, dated 2 months earlier. The item listed was a gold bracelet, one of the heirlooms Melissa's mother had given her. She hadn't even realized it was missing. Her stomach twisted as she read the name on the receipt, Richard Harper. She didn't confront him. She didn't know how to. But that night, she added a new page to her journal. She titled it, "What Else Don't I Know?" Around this time, Richard began keeping a small hammer and a flashlight in the basement, tucked behind the furnace. He told himself it was just in case of emergencies, but the way he checked on them every night, as if preparing for something, said otherwise. His thoughts were getting darker. His anxiety had mutated into full-blown obsession. He started imagining conversations Melissa might be having with lawyers, thinking she was preparing to leave him, expose him, destroy him. Melissa, for her part, had started researching therapists. She never made an appointment, but she bookmarked 3 different offices. One of the websites had a quote on the homepage that stuck with her. "Silence can be just as loud as violence." She read it over and over again, not because she didn't understand it, but because she understood it too well. The house had become a stage, and they were actors playing roles neither of them believed in anymore. Smiles in public, silence in private. They slept in the same bed, but it might as well have been 1,000 miles wide. Every movement, every word, every glance between them was loaded with tension, and neither one knew how to fix it. But the truth was, it was already too late. Something irreversible had started, and though Melissa couldn't name it, she could feel it. The air in the house had changed. The walls no longer felt safe. The man she had married had turned into someone she didn't know, and soon she would find out just how much of him had been lost. The morning of March 17th began like any other. Birds chirped outside the window, and the early spring sun filtered through half-open blinds. Melissa got up first, fed Bailey the golden retriever, and made herself a cup of tea. Richard remained in bed, pretending to sleep. He heard every step she took, every cupboard she opened. His thoughts weren't on breakfast or emails or work meetings. They were locked onto one thing: the sentence. It had been a simple phrase. 7 words. Spoken by Melissa 3 days earlier, while they were sorting through old receipts in the office drawer. She had said casually, almost jokingly, "You've been acting like you're hiding something." At the time, Richard had forced a chuckle, brushing it off with a comment about tax season making everyone paranoid. But inside, her words had detonated something. They spun in his mind, growing louder each day. "You've been acting like you're hiding something." He began to replay the moment constantly. Her tone, her expression, the way she looked at him, not with suspicion, but with concern. And yet, concern felt just as threatening. Because to Richard, concern meant attention, attention meant scrutiny, and scrutiny eventually would mean exposure. He could feel her closing in on truths she hadn't even asked about yet. In reality, Melissa hadn't thought twice about the sentence. She had already brushed it off in her mind. To her, it was just another attempt to reconnect, to get him, to talk, to open up about what was clearly bothering him. But to Richard, it was confirmation that she knew everything, that she had seen through his lies, the missing money, the fake investment statements, the pawned jewelry, all of it. He believed her silence wasn't innocence, it was strategy. That morning, Melissa left the house briefly to pick up design samples from a client's office downtown. She kissed Bailey goodbye, left a note for Richard about dinner, and locked the door behind her. Richard watched her from the upstairs window. As soon as her car turned the corner, he went into the basement. He opened a locked cabinet that Melissa didn't even know existed. Inside were printouts, withdrawal slips, forged, emails and burner phone receipts, all tied together by red string and color-coded tabs. He had tried to construct a narrative that, in his mind, could protect him if anyone ever asked questions. He believed he had built a safety net. But now, that sentence echoed again. "You've been acting like you're hiding something." He sat on the concrete floor, his back against the furnace, breathing heavily. That one sentence had shattered whatever illusion of control he still clung to. She had seen him. She had seen him. By the time Melissa returned home that afternoon, the air in the house felt heavier than usual. She put the design samples on the dining table and walked to the kitchen. Richard was seated at the counter, sipping water. He didn't say hello. She sensed something was off, but had learned not to press him when he was in these moods. She simply nodded, put her bag away, and went upstairs to change. That evening, they sat in the living room together. Melissa worked on her laptop while Richard watched her silently. He wasn't watching what she typed. He was studying her movements, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way she sipped her tea without making a sound. Every detail felt ominous to him, like a silent code he couldn't crack. She asked him if he wanted to order dinner or cook something. He muttered, "Doesn't matter." She decided on ordering Thai and placed the order. When it arrived, Richard didn't eat. Melissa noticed but said nothing. She had grown used to his silence. She thought he was sinking into another wave of stress. In truth, he was deciding whether tonight would be the night. Around 10 p.m., Melissa went to the bathroom. Richard used the moment to go back to the basement. He stood in front of the cabinet again, but didn't open it this time. Instead, he walked over to the far corner where a black toolbox rested beneath a shelf. From inside, he pulled out the hammer, the same one he had been checking on each night. He held it in both hands, feeling the weight. Breathing in the cold, metallic smell of the basement, he walked back upstairs slowly, each step creaking beneath him. He placed the hammer beneath the couch, hidden from view. Melissa was still in the bathroom. He sat back down and waited. That night, Melissa went to bed early. Richard stayed downstairs. He stared at the living room ceiling for hours. He imagined conversations that hadn't happened yet. Confrontations, police interviews, courtroom scenes. All imagined, all self-created yet vivid and real in his spiraling mind. He believed that if she spoke that sentence again, it would be the end. If she confronted him, if she told someone, his life would be over. Around 3 a.m., he crept into the bedroom. Melissa was asleep, her body curled slightly toward the center of the bed. Moonlight poured in through the window, casting soft shadows across the sheets. Richard stood over her for a long time. His hands trembled, his mind racing. The hammer was still downstairs, but the idea of it filled the room like a presence. He didn't act that night, but something inside him changed permanently. The line between fear and rage blurred beyond recognition. It was no longer about protecting secrets. It was about eliminating threats. The next day, Melissa noticed something had shifted again. Richard hovered more. He asked more questions. Odd questions. Where did you go just now? Who were you texting? Why did you move that receipt? She didn't argue. She tried to stay calm, to avoid igniting whatever this mood was. But that evening, she opened her journal and wrote a new sentence. "I don't feel safe here anymore." She considered calling Anna, or even her sister Erica, to say something out loud, but stopped herself. She didn't want to sound paranoid. After all, Richard hadn't done anything. Not yet. But in the basement, behind the locked cabinet, Richard had already written his own final sentence in his head, a decision, a resolve. Just because of one sentence, everything had begun to unravel. And now, that sentence, spoken so casually, so innocently, was about to become the line that divided a life of silence from a night of horror. March 20th arrived with gray clouds hanging low in the sky. A steady drizzle pattered against the windows, soft and constant. Melissa had always loved rainy days. She found comfort in the hush it brought over the world. But today, it felt different. The silence in the house was no longer peaceful. It was heavy and anxious. She walked from room to room, doing light cleaning, folding laundry, trying to fill the stillness with movement. Anything to keep herself from thinking too much. She had slept poorly the night before. Richard had stayed in the basement until long past midnight, only coming up when he thought she was asleep. Melissa had kept her eyes shut tightly, breathing, slow and deep, pretending to be unaware. But she had heard the creak of the steps, the quiet click of the cabinet door, the faint scrape of metal. She didn't know what he was doing down there, but she no longer wanted to find out. When the doorbell rang around noon, Melissa jumped. It was Anna, holding 2 coffees and a bag of pastries. Melissa hesitated for a moment before letting her in. They sat in the kitchen, talking in hushed tones, the way people do in houses where something feels wrong. Anna studied her friend closely. Melissa looked tired, pale skin, dark circles, and that distant, distracted look in her eyes. Her smile was forced, her laugh hollow. When Anna casually asked if everything was okay, Melissa opened her mouth, paused, then shook her head. She couldn't put it into words. She didn't want to start explaining things she didn't fully understand herself. So instead she changed the subject to Anna's kids, the school bake sale, anything light and harmless. When Anna left an hour later, she hugged Melissa tightly and whispered, "Call me, okay?" "Anytime." Melissa nodded, but said nothing. As she watched Anna's car drive away, a sharp chill settled in her chest. She realized that she had no idea what she was waiting for. Was she hoping Richard would return to the person he once was? Or was she waiting for some undeniable sign that it was time to run? Later that afternoon, Richard came home early. Melissa was in the living room reading. She heard the front door open, the sound of wet shoes on the floor, and then silence. She glanced up to see him standing in the doorway, dripping from the rain, his eyes fixed on her like he was studying a stranger. He didn't say hello. Instead, he asked a strange question. "Did you tell anyone about me?" Melissa blinked, unsure how to respond. "What do you mean?" He stared for a moment, then turned and walked away without answering. Melissa sat frozen on the couch, heart pounding. She knew something was coming. She could feel it. That night, she waited until Richard had gone to the basement again. Then quietly, she retrieved her journal from behind a loose panel in the closet and began writing furiously. She documented everything, his question, his behavior, the fear that now lingered in every room of the house. She wrote the name of the pawn shop, the name of the therapist she had almost called, and finally, the sentence she now couldn't stop thinking about. "If something happens to me, it wasn't an accident." She tore the page from the journal, folded it carefully, and slid it into a book on the shelf, Wuthering Heights, a favorite from her college days. She didn't know why she chose that book. Maybe because it was about a love that had turned into something much darker, something haunted. Richard came to bed late. Melissa pretended to be asleep again. But this time, she could feel the difference in the way he lay down beside her. He didn't shift or breathe deeply like someone settling in for the night. He was completely still, awake, thinking. The next morning, she made a decision. She would leave, at least for a few days. Go to her sister's house, clear her head, get some space. She waited until Richard left for work, then began packing a small bag. Just a few clothes, toiletries, and the journal. She wrapped it in a sweater and zipped it into the side pocket. But as she opened the bedroom closet to get her shoes, she noticed something that made her freeze. The hammer. It was lying on the top shelf, not hidden, not tucked away, just placed. There, deliberately it seemed, as if to be found. Melissa stared at it for a long time, her mind racing. Was this a threat? A warning? Or had she imagined the worst? She didn't touch it. She closed the closet slowly, grabbed her bag, and walked to the door. But just as she reached for the handle, she stopped. Her phone vibrated with a text from Richard. "Don't go anywhere. We need to talk." No emojis, no punctuation, just the words. She stood there, trembling. He never texted like that. He never even cared when she went out. But today, he did. Today, it felt like leaving would cross a line she hadn't known existed until now. Melissa sat down on the couch, unsure what to do next. She could leave anyway, drive straight to Anna's, or the police, or even a hotel. But something about the way he had written the message made her hesitate. She felt cornered, trapped in a web that had been spun slowly and silently over months. She waited. At 4:38 p.m., Richard's car pulled into the driveway. Melissa heard the engine cut, the door slam, the footsteps approaching the house. She stood up, her breath shallow, her heart slamming against her ribs. The door opened, and with that, the final act began, silent, sudden, and irreversible. The doctor creaked open slowly, and Richard stepped inside, soaked from the rain. Melissa stood frozen in the living room, her packed bag resting against the couch. The air between them felt dense, as if something invisible was pulling them apart and shoving them together all at once. Richard shut the door behind him with care, almost too much care, like he was sealing off the world. He didn't speak. He looked at the bag first, then at her. His eyes, once familiar, now looked hollow. Melissa instinctively stepped back, her fingers twitching toward the phone on the table, but she didn't grab it. Instead, she held her breath and waited. Richard walked past her slowly, glancing at the windows, the walls, the corners. He seemed to be scanning the house as though expecting someone else to be there. Melissa's voice trembled when she finally spoke. She said she needed to get away for a while, to clear her mind. She said she wasn't leaving forever, just for a few days. He didn't respond. Instead, he sat down on the edge of the couch and placed his hands between his knees. His shoulders were hunched, his breathing shallow. Then, finally, he looked at her and asked the same question again. "Did you tell anyone about me?" Melissa didn't answer right away. In her silence, Richard's expression shifted. Just a flicker, but she saw it. The tension in his jaw, the tightness in his eyes. And in that moment, she knew the truth. He wasn't asking for information. He was checking. He had already decided what her answer would be. She said no. Richard leaned forward, his fingers lacing together. He began to talk, slowly, quietly, about pressure, about failure, about everything falling apart. He talked about money missing, about lies, about how he never meant for any of it to go that far. He talked as if confessing to a priest, but with no hint of regret. Just a deep, gnawing fear that someone would expose him. Melissa stood still, arms crossed tightly over her chest. She realized this wasn't a conversation. It was a prelude. Richard reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope. He tossed it onto the coffee table. Bank slips, transfers, evidence. He told her he knew she had been watching him, that she had been waiting for the right time to destroy him. Melissa shook her head. She said she hadn't told anyone, that she didn't want to destroy him. She just wanted to leave. But Richard had already made up his mind. In his eyes, her silence was not forgiveness. It was ammunition. Her patience was not love. It was preparation. He believed she was setting a trap even if she wasn't. Paranoia had eaten through every corner of his mind. And that sentence, "You've been acting like you're hiding something," had never stopped playing in his head. He stood up slowly, walked to the closet and opened it. Melissa flinched. He reached up, and when he turned around, the hammer was in his hand. No words were exchanged. There was no fight, no final plea. Just an overwhelming stillness that preceded violence like the last breath before a scream. What happened in the next moments was fast, brutal, and merciless. Melissa tried to run, but the living room was too small. She tried to scream, but the first blow silenced her. The weight of betrayal, of fear, of obsession all came crashing down, in every swing. When it was over, the house returned to silence. The same silence Melissa had once loved. Richard stood over her, breathless, covered in the evidence of what he had done. But he didn't cry. He didn't panic. He moved with cold calculation. He wrapped her body in a tarp from the garage, cleaned the floor as best he could, changed his clothes. Then he sat at the dining table and waited for nightfall. He drove out of the city under the cover of darkness. The rain masked everything, the stains on the tarp, the mud on his shoes, the emptiness in the passenger seat. He stopped near a wooded area off a quiet highway, one he had passed many times before. He dragged her body into the woods, buried her in a shallow grave, and placed a few rocks over the soil. When he returned home, he burned the tarp in a metal barrel behind the shed. The hammer he buried in a neighbor's yard at midnight, behind a fence he knew was rarely checked. Then he cleaned again, scrubbed, repainted a wall, replaced the rug. By morning, it was as if Melissa had never been there. He told her family and friends that she had gone to visit her sister. He texted from her phone for days. He said she needed space, time, that she'd be back soon. But the lies began to fray quickly. Anna tried calling, then Melissa's sister, then co-workers. The responses Richard gave were strange, unconvincing. When Anna finally showed up at the house and noticed Melissa's favorite coat still hanging by the door, alarm bells rang. She went to the police. Within a week, the house was a crime scene. Detectives found inconsistencies. Melissa's car parked in the same spot, untouched. Her credit cards inactive. her toothbrush still wet. When they questioned Richard, he stuck to the story. She had left. She needed time. But his timeline faltered. His expression cracked. Then they found the journal. Not in the closet, not in the bag, but in Wuthering Heights, right where Melissa had hidden it. The torn page with her warning, the names, the fears, and the final line. If something happens to me, it wasn't an accident. It unraveled everything. A week later, the shallow grave was discovered by a local hiker's dog. DNA confirmed it. The cause of death was clear. The evidence was overwhelming. Richard was arrested without incident. He never asked for a lawyer. He never cried. In court, he sat expressionless as the prosecution laid out the story. A husband unraveling under guilt, paranoia, and pressure. A wife who saw too much. A sentence that echoed louder than any scream. The jury didn't deliberate long. The verdict was guilty. The sentence was life. In the years that followed, Melissa's friends and family tried to piece together how it had come to this. How a single sentence, spoken without malice, could ignite such horror. Her story became a cautionary tale. Her journal, a relic. Her life, a reminder that danger doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it smiles. And sometimes it begins with just one sentence.